Welcome to the Cyber Center for Biblical Studies. Hi, my name is Herb Bateman. Today we want to discuss a book that's part of an e-book for translating the New Testament. The book is translating the book of Ephesians, clause by clause, and we have with us today the author of the book, Ben Simpson. Ben is a professor of New Testament studies at Dallas Theological Seminary, and he's going to share with us some aspects of this book. Ben, welcome.
Thanks, Herb, for having me.
Oh, delighted. So let's talk about this book that you've written, and why don't you begin by giving us, in a sentence or two, the purpose of the book?
Yes, the purpose of the book really is designed to help students engage into the Greek text. And so more often than not today, we have students trying to veer away from the Greek text because of fear of the language or maybe a sense of urgency in ministry. They tend to move away from the Greek text. But really what we want students to do is engage in the Greek text more. And so this book is designed to help them engage in the Greek text of the book of Ephesians.
Okay. So with that in mind, how does this book unfold that helps a student or even a pastor engage with this New Testament Greek text?
Mm-hmm. So the book really has three parts. The first part is an introduction where I help the reader understand some of the peculiarities of the book of Ephesians and Paul's writing style in general. I include some translating tips there. The second part of the book is more of an interactive section for the student to give their own translation. That section involves a contextual orientation that helps the reader understand where they are in the book of Ephesians, in the Paul's argument in Ephesians. It gives a Greek text, but then it also gives a structural layout. And in the structural layout, I give space for the reader to give their own translation as they work through the book. And then the third part, I give my own translation, and I explain some of the syntactical decisions that I made throughout the book of Ephesians.
Okay, very good. Well, let's go back to that introduction. If I were to ask you, what is one important tip that you give that would enable and help me to be able to translate Paul's letter to the Ephesians, what tip do you seem to emphasize as being really important for understanding and translating Ephesians?
Yeah, for the book of Ephesians, probably one of the thorniest issues for a Greek student is Paul's lengthy sentences. And so Paul has about 6 sentences in the book of Ephesians that are over 100 words long. And so probably the most notorious is Ephesians 1, 3 through 14. So the entire first 11 verses of the body of the book is one sentence. And so most English translations have to break that up into several different sentences. And so Paul uses a number of different grammatical devices to string these sentences together. Probably his most favorite device is an adverbial participle. And so as students begin to understand how the adverbial participle works, or a hina or a hadi clause works, they'll be able to unpack these lengthy sentences that Paul generally likes, and as I would add, most English readers don't like.
All right. Well, let's go into that second section, that interactive section where a student can translate this letter on their own. Is this just one running presentation of the Greek text? Do you break it out into units of thought? How exactly does this lay out in this second section?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we break up the book of Ephesians into 14 different units, and we generally follow a paragraph by paragraph model. And so a student will see each paragraph of the book of Ephesians, and they'll translate paragraph by paragraph. We give a contextual orientation, which places that paragraph in the flow or in the structure of the book of Ephesians, so they know where they are where Paul is making his argument, or how Paul is making his argument throughout the book. And so the student will get that kind of orientation. And then we provide the structural layout. The structural layout actually breaks that paragraph up clause by clause. And what the structural layout will do is it'll help the students see the relationship that each clause has to another and how Paul builds his argument. And so one of my approaches to exegesis is looking at the small units, so clause by clause, and how those various clauses make up Paul's larger argument.
Okay. All right, so give me an example. Would an example be, why don't you give me an example where Paul makes a statement and then based upon that statement, his argument somewhat unfolds. Can you give me an example?
Yeah, in Ephesians 4:1, we see Paul telling the Ephesians to walk in a sense of unity. And throughout that first paragraph in the second section of his book, Ephesians, this begins in Ephesians 4, he really spells out what unity means and how a believer who is in Christ and belongs to Christ can live in unity.
So what type of words does he use to demonstrate the manner of walk or the means for walking? Does he use participles at that point? Are they adverbial participles that explain how to walk?
Mm-hmm. In that section, those are more discrete sentences, clause by clause.
Okay.
And so generally when we move into the second half of Ephesians, Paul becomes a little bit more linear in his writing style.
Okay, so there's a difference in style first half versus second half.
That's correct.
All right, good point. Now let's talk a little bit about this final section. What is it that, in what way is this not a commentary, and in what way does it supplement a commentary, this third section where you kind of give your answer key?
Absolutely. Well, again, we reproduce the structural layout, but along with the structural layout, I give my translation, which goes clause by clause. And then I provide the syntactical guide, which I would call a key there. And so for each structural marker that builds into the clause, I provide the semantic orientation or the semantic details of that verb, but also the syntactical details of the verbals as well.
Okay.
And so a pastor or a student can look at that and see how that verb in that clause is functioning.
Okay.
And so it really kind of gives the nuts and bolts of the Greek text to the student.
Okay.
And so it really doesn't replace a commentary. A commentary will go into that detail, but really on some of the more important issues, whereas we're looking at every clause, and commentary is going to give more theological background, more background, cultural background to the book. And so we really give the nuts and bolts of the Greek text so a student can go to a commentary and have a better understanding of what the conversation is going on there.
Okay. And when you talk about structural marker, I'm assuming if it's an independent clause, the main structural marker would be the main verb.
That's correct.
But if it's a dependent clause, might be that conjunction plus its main verb, like a hina plus verb or a hadi plus verb. Is that how you're basically understanding structural markers?
That's correct.
Okay.
So generally when I look at our adverbial structural markers, that could be a hati or a hina along with an indicative verb with the hati or a subjunctive verb with the hina clause. Paul will use an adverbial infinitives to move his argument along. He could use an adverbial participle to move his argument along as well.
Okay. All right. Well, Ben, thank you so much. I appreciate the work that you've done on this work in Ephesians, and thank you for joining us. And I trust that if you have a hankering for translating the Greek New Testament, I trust that you'll look up this book, Translating Ephesians Clause by Clause, available on Amazon, and that you will enjoy practicing your Greek. In the meantime, I trust you'll have a great day, and until next time, thank you so much.